Welcome to MamaFuel, the podcast that fuels every mama's heart, soul, mind, and body, and hopefully sparks a few dreams along the way. I'm Ann Ferguson, Chief Nurturer and Mama Mentor at the Centered Mama Project, and your host for this podcast. I'll be sharing real, raw, and often funny conversations with beautiful mamas from around the world to remind you that you're not alone and that you're doing amazingly on this wild journey of shepherding small humans as they make their way on our beautiful planet. Let's get started.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. My name is Ann Ferguson, and I am your host, and super thrilled as ever to be here because today's guest is the most random connected person to me that I met in the most random way a couple of years ago. And I'm so thrilled that we connected that day. I'm so thrilled that she came and talked to me and that we can have this conversation. So Chantal Patton is a fellow Canadian, a mama living in Switzerland, kind of.
Yeah.
Who went to school, weirdly, with my brother, my younger brother, and into a very specific school in the town that we grew up in, which is not big. It was the only French language school, and then there was the only French language high school. And we just have all of these similarities along our path. And we met a couple of years ago at the Expat Expo here in Geneva. And I'm just so glad that that you came and talked to me, Chantal, and that we've been able to connect. And I'm thrilled to have you on because we have so much juicy stuff to connect on.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Anne. I'm so happy to be here today.
Such a pleasure. Excited. Okay, so let's dig in because I have all the questions.
All right.
Tell us, what does your life look like right now?
That is a loaded question.
I know.
I'm going to be as transparent as possible because I prefer to be authentic, if you will. And so I'll describe my life a little bit to everyone listening. And hopefully people won't think I'm just too crazy because you can describe it as crazy, adventurous. It's not for everyone, I would say, but it is our life, right? So we are currently right now in Switzerland, and we do move around a lot. And I used to always think it was my husband that just was like ants in his pants. And then I started realizing maybe I had that too, because I'm following along and I'm going along. And so we homeschool our kids, we run an internet business. And so my life is nonstop. And I love, what you do because it's all about, taking time out for yourself and whatnot. And that's one thing I do need to learn to do because you could call us, either workaholics or just extremists or whatever you want to call it. We tend to go because we're managing lots of things. I'm spinning many plates. Yeah. But so far, so good. I've been able to manage it all. So with a lot of help, I do have a lot of help around me. So that's one thing that I'm grateful for.
Well, having help around you can only happen if you ask for it and you allow it and you receive it, right? So
yes,
grateful, but also that you've actually made the time and to know what your needs are, which we've often talked about in previous episodes of the podcast, but also to speak them aloud, to give yourself the permission to have those needs and to ask for help it is a form of self-care and a form of self-love, which
absolutely is, because I do take on a lot myself and I do manage a lot myself, but then there comes a point where you just can't.
Yeah.
And I've realized that actually by putting myself in situations where I can't. So for example, we were just in Africa and we had no internet, no electricity, and you're at a breaking point where you're like, I need to get back to so and so and so and so and so and so, and I just can't. I physically cannot do it. And so then you have to learn to delegate. And it was probably one of the best things for me because I just started saying, hey, I can actually delegate a lot more. And then I get that much more time back for myself to do the other things that are also important to be done, right?
Yes, so exactly. And lived and experienced because you have 3 daughters, right? How old are they?
We have a 14-year-old, 12-year-old, and 10-year-old. So
okay. And so you homeschool your kids, which in Switzerland, I bow to you because it is not easy. Certainly in the Francophone parts of Switzerland, it's just a non-starter if you don't have a teaching degree, basically.
Absolutely. And different cantons are strict and some it's flat out illegal. Where we live, it's legal. We're in Vaud. And so we do have the right now to homeschool. They do a control and there is a lot of oppression against that. And they're trying to push, the parents are trying to commit create communities so that they can, present to the government what they do and why we should have the right to homeschool. So it is kind of on shaky grounds right now, but nonetheless, for now, touch on wood, all is good. So
I'll knock wood with you. There we go.
Yeah.
So you have your 3 girls, and together with your husband, you run an internet business. But what has fascinated me about the day that we met, even just from the day that we met again, a couple of years ago, was that you were like, oh yeah, we're just going to live in Spain. So, can't really get together, but it would be great to stay in touch. And I was like, oh, you're going to live in Spain. Let's talk about that. And you just said that you're in Africa. So to people who know nothing about you, explain how you guys live and the kinds of adventures that you've gone on as a family.
Okay. So, well, we love to travel. We love to experience new cultures and meet new types of people. And we're quite open in that sense. And so we kind of got the travel bug. Well, we've always had it, I guess you can say. We've always written down, we want to travel. It's always been at the top of our list. Mm-hmm. And we took our whole lives and we said, okay, this is what we want to do. How do we model our life and our business so that it can give us what we're looking to do? And so having a 9-to-5 job was out of the question because no boss would ever give us the time off that we would need to be able to do that. And then, certain commitments we had to say no to, even though they were very attractive. It just wouldn't have worked out time-wise to physically be there, or, so there's like give and take with it. But everything we've done so far has allowed us to be mobile and location independent, which is great. And now with homeschooling, even more so, because before they were in school. And so we had to work around school holidays and extensions of school holidays and, taking them out of school and so on and so forth. But back in 2013, we did come to Europe and we had set out on 5 weeks of holiday. And those 5 weeks turned into 3 months. And then we're like, you know what? I think we can manage our business remotely from Europe overseas, and let's continue. And so we kind of did that. And then we just went back to, at the time we were living in Florida, we closed all the doors there and said, okay, let's officially move. And of course, as you know, we're here, we're right in the center of Europe. So it's easy to hop around and very cheap to get around with all the EasyJet flights and everything. So, we started doing that, and then we started going to different continents. And so now we're at 90 countries right now that we've covered, which is crazy.
That's amazing. With 3 kids, not just the 2 of you.
Yeah, with the 3 kids. And so we'll pick up and go to a place for a few weeks, sometimes for a month, sometimes for longer. And so that's what we've been doing. And so we've got big plans, and just recently, that's why we kind of made ourselves public and started putting ourselves out there with our YouTube channel and different things like that to kind of transition the business side of things to match again what our lifestyle is, right?
I love the intentionality with which you and your husband are crafting your life. And you're not the first guest that I've had on that's talked about that, but you mentioned extreme living earlier. I think you're probably the most fully expressed, big is the word that comes to me. Like you're the biggest, most largely expressed version of this, because how you choose to express your calling, your dharma, as some will call it, your what you're meant to do here in the world, is that you guys are citizens of the world and you travel, and it's really important to you that your children are part of the passion that you and your husband share, and that they get to know other cultures, and that they get a completely different sense of what's important and what isn't, versus kids who maybe have a much more traditional, linear experience in their upbringing. How old were your kids when you started this big traveling?
Well, I guess it depends on how you look at it, because Chloe was 4 weeks old when we left Canada for the first time. We had midwives, and I needed the special authority because normally they have to be about 6 weeks, and we asked for special permission so that we can zip off. So technically, we've been kind of moving since that. Chloe's our youngest, so she's now 10. And but when we really started moving was when she was 5. So we wanted to wait till after diapers, after bottles, all the stuff that goes along, and then that way it would just make it easier. So that's when we really started moving around.
And how did the girls react to that?
You know what? So the transition from Florida to Europe was amazing. They fell in love with everything about the culture here because it's just different, right? There, they were going to school very early in the morning. I wouldn't pick them up till late because they were in after school programs. We never really had time because then there was all the homework after school and just the rush. Your neighbors were very far from you. You didn't see each other. And then all of a sudden we moved here where there was like this community effect. You walked outside, you bumped into people. They can walk to the grocery store by themselves. No, never in Florida would you let your kids walk alone by themselves. So they all of a sudden had this like freedom and they had this joie de vivre that they didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And they were like getting up and just happy. They were really, really happy. So we were all kind of in this and they loved it. And now we're at a different level where we're like, okay, now we're going to go here and we're going to go there. And they're just like, they're experiencing things that for them is so normal that if you were to look at what they've gone through or what they've done, they're like, oh yeah, that's just normal, but it's to other people, it's really not normal, right? What they were doing. But they're on board. We sometimes ask them, would you rather go to school or continue doing what we're doing? And we're more the sense that either way we're doing what we're doing, but we sometimes like to ask them, their opinions and stuff. And although they really like school and they like their friends and stuff, they prefer to have the option to be able to see and travel and stuff like that. So it's nice to have them on board and have them willing, if you will. So they're not going kicking and fighting. Let's just put it that way.
which is awesome, because doing anything with your family when all it takes is one person kicking and screaming, and it changes the dynamic so much and makes it harder for the people who actually want to do the thing. I was talking to Charlene Jannerfeld in episode 10, if I'm not mistaken. We were talking about how she and her husband used to drive along the Jura, the Swiss Jura, and they would go from Lausanne to Geneva and drive along the Jura to try to find a place that was above the snow line and that would allow them to get out into nature really quickly. And she has actually now built an entire business, and really, as a family, they intentionally created this life where they walk out of their house and they're in the mountains, like they're in the forest. Wow. So they live surrounded by other people, like they're not, hermits, but they live up in Saint-Sergue so you'll know where that is. But for people who aren't here, it's up a winding mountain road, not very far, like 15 minutes up the mountain, but enough that you're above the clouds, sit over Geneva in the winter, and you're above the snow line. And it's listening to her talk about how completely intentionally she and her husband chose the land that they were going to build their house on, and that they knew that it meant that he would have to commute further, but then that actually was their choice. And it made it easier for them to get the kids out the door. It made it easier for them when the resistance was there of like, oh, I don't want to stay. Like when I want to do something like that, we've got 45 minutes of driving to get, or half an hour of driving. And it's a barrier to doing the things that you want to do, right? So it sounds like you guys have found a way to set up your structure, both on a business front, but also from a family organization perspective, in a way that allows you to, when you decide you're going to go, you pick up and you go. Obviously not from one day to the next, because there are 5 of you, but.
Yeah. And saying all that, it's very true. And there are times where, in my own opinion, like we could just kind of tone it down a little bit, because like I was saying earlier, there's a lot to manage. Right. But at the same time, in retrospect, when you kind of just go and jump into it, everything kind of just lines up, even though you don't always feel ready, or you don't always feel like organized, or like you can just scratch the whole organization off the list. Actually, it's never organized in the sense that most people would plan a trip. Right. Sometimes it's like day to day, but it just always works out. We're kind of just like flowing, and it just seems to, it works out for us. So.
You are living, I'm listening to a book right now by Dr. Wayne Dyer, called A Wish is Fulfilled. And one of the things that he's talking about is how we all have this I am power. And this I am power is this, I'm going to completely butcher it, so apologies to you up in heaven, Wayne, or wherever you've come back into this world. He talks about how we have this power to heal ourselves, to create things with the universe, to change our thoughts and to change our reality. And it really sounds like you guys are very much in that flow you mentioned of trusting, of like, okay, well, we're all together, we're all healthy, we've got the resources we need. this is going to be fine. Like, and I'm sure there are moments that are not fine. I'm sure you've had belly bugs where you're all heaving over the same toilet bowl or wishing that you were, in a Swiss hospital. But
absolutely.
I can imagine. Because that for me, like I have a high level of, like, my baseline anxiety is pretty high. And that's the first thing that comes up for me when I hear you, talking about your traveling, and when I see your videos, because you've got a great YouTube channel where you talk about your travels and we can see your family, and we'll link to that in the show notes. The first thing that comes up for me is a tightness of fear of like, but what if something happened? But what if something happened? And then I hear Marlon, Nemo's dad from Finding Nemo, going, because Dory goes, well, if he never goes anywhere, then nothing's going to happen. Because the dad's like, you can't go out there because something might happen. And she's like, but if he never goes out there, nothing's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? And you guys live that.
It's funny because, and there's different levels, I would say, of, I don't know if I'd call it anxiety or worry or fear that people have, right? But what's interesting is like, it just kind of gets overcome. I guess I've never really had that type of fear. I've had other types of fears, if you will, while traveling. Sometimes we'll be somewhere and we don't even know where we're going to stay that night, which sounds absolutely crazy. But when you're in certain countries, it's better just to kind of go day by day than have a structured plan, because nothing ever works out.
Like where?
Like in many African countries, because you don't know, someone might get sick, or a bus might not show up, or it might be delayed, or something might not work, or something might break down. So we kind of went with the expectation that nothing's going to work. And then that way, when everything kind of did work, then we were like, this is great, because we said to ourselves, we don't know what to expect, right? In many countries we go to, everything works. We're used to Switzerland, that everything's just so perfect and so organized that if a train is late, you're like, oh my gosh, this is ridiculous, right? And we knew
text messages for people who don't live here. My husband was commuting to Fribourg, which is about an hour and a half away, and he would get a text message if the train was going to be 30 seconds late.
Right. You see? So we're in a country where everything is just works. And so we knew that by going, and we've been to many other countries, but we've never been to other African countries. So we didn't know what it was going to be like, but we just expected, okay, let's just have no expectations. Because if you remove all expectations, then you can't get upset, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how we went, with that kind of motto in our head, and with not a big structure of plan to say, okay, this is where we have to be. So we just figured, we'll go as the flow. And it's a really good thing we did, because there was delays. There was, like you said, we were sick. We did have hiccups, and we had to stay extra nights or not extra nights. And then we didn't have long form birth certificates to get into South Africa. So we were delayed there. So there's all these little things that we had to kind of overcome as we were traveling. Mm-hmm. So they were other kind of obstacles, if you will, but they weren't really, it's never a fear, because, people are people all around the world. They're all living their lives, raising families, just like we are here. Everything's different, but they're all still doing the exact same thing, And so it was fine. Yeah. We didn't have that worry, if you will.
What lessons do you think your kids are, as I say that, I don't like the word, I can't think of a different word, but what do you think your girls are taking on?
Like their biggest take back, or their biggest
their biggest takeaway, or maybe the values that they're learning, or shifts in their perspective that you've been seeing over the 5 years that you've been traveling intensely?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing is there's no judging, in a sense. Like, for example, like I came from a small little village in Canada where there were just no internationals. There probably still aren't very many internationals. It's not a big city. Like, we were north of the city. Wow. And so it was farmland, farmers. And so you get a lot of that, I don't want to call it redneck mentality, but it kind of is, right? And I grew up like that, very, just different upbringing.
The world is small. The world is very homogeneous.
Mm-hmm. And when you travel, you start realizing there's other ways to do things. And it doesn't mean that because ours might be a more efficient way to do it, that it's wrong the way they're doing it. And so understanding that everywhere in every country, they just do things differently. They raise their kids differently. They speak different languages. They have a different way, a different mannerism, a different way of greeting. We are raised, oh, this is the way you should greet someone. Well, in different countries, it's different. So I think for my kids and for me, we've learned that, like, just to appreciate the other cultures and the other ways of thinking and the other religions and the other, and not to have so much of a divide. And so our kids don't have that. Like they'll go play with any type of child at any different level. And so they don't see division as I would have had when I was growing up, or differences. They don't see the differences, if you will.
Yeah, they don't. That's really interesting. We went to Indonesia last spring. Mm-hmm. And we were wandering through the inner island that we were staying on, and it was really striking to us. It was the first time for the girls and I that we had been in a country where there was real poverty, and we could see people who were living just on platforms, a little bit raised from the ground, so that when the seawater came high and actually drowned the atoll, like this, it's not even an island. They're called the Gili Islands, and they're completely flat, right? So people living on these platforms about a foot off the ground, and they had a couple of walls, but some of them didn't. And this is where they were living, and you would see that the kids were literally kicking a tin can, and they were so happy kicking their tin can, and my girls, it was the first time, and for them they withdrew into themselves because they didn't know how to bridge the divide between the lives that the extremely privileged lives that we all live here in Switzerland, mm-hmm. And what they were seeing. They hadn't seen enough of it to know how to reach out and how to get beyond the fact that they don't speak the same language, because we speak 3 languages at home. And so a lot of the places we go, and one of our kids speaks 2 other languages on top of that. So she's working on 5. And so a lot of the places that we go in Europe, we speak a reasonable facsimile of the language, or we can make ourselves understood. And in Indonesia, we just couldn't. It's just nothing. And so I'm really interested by that your girls have found the way to just people are people, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the very first time I realized that, it was in 2016. And we were in Thailand, up in Chiang Mai, and we were doing the crossover into Laos and Cambodia and visiting that kind of golden triangle. And it was getting late, and we just didn't want to drive all the way back down to where we were staying. And so we were trying to find a place to stay for the night. And so we were just literally going from place to place to place. And we found this one place that had like a bed, we're like, oh, this is great. It has a bed, and the lady, we went into her house, and she had nothing in the house. I mean, there was like just a little plastic table, and then there was a swing hanging from the ceiling. And then they had a mattress on the floor, and it was just like one room. And right away, my kids were in with her kids, swinging on the swing and having fun. And I remember thinking to myself, I was looking at her house like, oh my gosh, this is how she's living. And my kids were just right in there playing and just totally getting along, and it didn't even faze them. They just had seen so much already that they're just like, that's okay. It's normal, and
cool,
yeah. And so that was the very first time that I had the realization, like, wow, my kids have a different way of being brought up. Like they're not standing there looking like, oh, like,
what do I do?
I mean, it was just they were right in it. And then I just remember thinking like, this is awesome. Obviously they realize there's differences, but they don't really let it stop them. They just, and what's really funny, I think, when you're asking about the children too, because they've been in so many different situations, they'll play with like a 70-year-old man just as much as they'll play with like a child their age, and they don't think anything different. Like they're just like, you're my friend for the day. Yeah, I'm going to hang out and play with you. Yeah. And like they'll like do that because like when you're traveling, they miss their friends. So they'll just make friends with anybody, and they'll be like, hey, you're my friend for the day. Let's go, which is really funny to see that aspect of it too. So life skills.
It's beautiful. Yeah. How do your 3 kids manage amongst themselves? Are they, because they've had these experiences, are they like super, super tight as a pack? Or are there moments of tension like you might expect there to be amongst the sisters? Or how does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have a little bit less of that because when you're as a family close like that, traveling together 24/7 together, you have to make it work. There's no, even as a couple, like that's a whole other conversation in itself, because you could just flip out and say, forget about this is not working out, or you can make it work. Like it's a choice that you have to make, right? And so when we're as that family structure together that long, we just make it work because it's more pleasant that way, right? Obviously. And they get along the dynamics of their relationship is probably different than other siblings would have. I grew up with my brother, and then I had two younger sisters many years younger than me, but we were always fighting. And my kids don't do that because I think they would just be, miserable if they did. Everybody would be miserable. So they have to get along, and they do, which is really nice. So, they have their moments, but.
Have you ever presenced that? Have you ever said, like, it's the five of us, we're a pack and we need to get along? So,
I'll say, or if they're bickering or whatever, I'll say, it's your sister, you have to love her. And, just change. Yeah. But it's not like, it just works out, I guess. It just
works out. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. And do their dynamics change when they're home? Because when you're home, we'll call home in air quotes, where you are now in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm. It is our home. It's our home base. Yeah, absolutely. Then they start kind of going out with their own little friends and doing their own little things, but they still are very close. Like they'll all go outside and go do activities together. So that's, I guess they're close in age too. So, but in one sense it changes a little bit, but not too much.
Yeah. So let's get into that other conversation that you mentioned. You talked about how, when you're in a relationship and you decide to do this kind of to put yourselves in situations that are potentially more high stress.
Absolutely.
I don't know if they're more high stress. They're different stress, right? They're not the familiar stress. So the familiar stress of everybody's got to get to school on time, everybody's got to get to work, got to pay the bills, gotta, can you travel, yada, yada, logistics, whatever. But those are the stresses that we grow up being told are normal. Mm-hmm. And that are part of regular life. But you guys have chosen a life outside of the lines, right? You're coloring outside the lines, which is so awesome. And it's so inspiring. When you were saying all of the descriptors earlier of your life, I was like, inspiring. You're inspiring. Amazing and inspiring. When, if you've chosen to color outside those lines, that will bring with it pressures and stresses on your marriage that
absolutely, and all different types of stresses. But if you understand, like in general, if you can just solve problems faster and whatever, then it's all about that, right? We have different stresses, but like you said, it's a different. It's worth the stress that you get versus having a 9-to-5 and having to be at a job, or because you could easily choose that path too, and maybe have more of a normal life, I guess you can call it. But then it's not what we want. So I'd rather have the pressure than the other, I guess you can say.
Yeah,
it's worth the stress.
The less mainstream pressures on the relationship versus the regular. Yeah.
Yeah.
So obviously the $1 million question is, how the hell do you guys make this work? Like, there are 5 of you traveling. Like, I'm guessing that you're not traveling with staff to carry your steamer trunks everywhere that you go and staying in luxury hotels. But at the same time, there are 5 of you who need to eat and still need to be schooled and need to
Well, I'll tell you, you can live very good in other countries, way cheaper. We're living in Switzerland. It's so expensive. It's like
I know,
crazy. You go outside and you take a breath of air, there's 50 francs. You know
Which
what I mean?
Is basically $50 for people listening all around.
Yeah, it's expensive. So for us to leave, we actually are doing ourselves a favor, because you go to the grocery store and you can eat out in other countries for the same price as your groceries, and then
oh my gosh,
you know what I'm saying? So in one sense, it's actually cheaper to travel than to be home, which sounds crazy. And then, there's obviously the housing and different things like that's always a big cost of travel. And so, in the past, we would just always pay out of our pocket when we would travel to different places. So we'd do Airbnbs, we'd do all different kinds of different accommodations. Just recently, though, now we're starting to build our YouTube channel, and we're going after it as a business, right? Because we want to have that opportunity to work with brands and work with hotels. And so in the different stays that we stayed in Africa, we did a lot of trade, which helped enormously. So we would contact the hotels and we would say, hey, look, we're looking to work with you and whatever. I have a sales background, so that's what I do in our main company. And so for me, it's just transitioning what I do already. Mm-hmm. And so we did do a lot that way. So that's been helpful. Then when it comes to flights and everything, my husband is like one of these guys who research every option, and he's a real genius when it comes to finding the best deals. And then because we have the work schedule that's very flexible, we can go on the dates that are less expensive. So we really play on those games as well to be able to find the best pricing for everything. And so yeah, I wouldn't say we're like traveling on the cheap, but we're doing all the things that we possibly can to make it that for us so that we can, afford the lifestyle that we want. And so there you go. That's basically how we do it.
And then, so we've mentioned your YouTube channel a couple of times. So you obviously have a digital nomad business setup, right?
That's right. Exactly.
Which in itself can make many people's heads go, like, I don't even know what that means. I don't even, traveling with a laptop, like, I don't even know what that means. And if you're going to stay in someone's hut in Thailand, I'm guessing that if they have a swing and a plastic table and a mattress on the floor, internet is not super fiber optic amazing like it is in Switzerland. So how do you, because you obviously you have responsibility for the 5 of you and for your clients. How do you do that and still travel? Because I think one of the things that happens, so I think I have lived myself and have heard so many times like, oh, but we couldn't because there's no internet, or the time zones are different, or my kid has to nap, or a list as long as a piece of string. How long is that? Forever. How do you actually make work when you're doing all of this amazing living?
Okay, so if we back it up, when we started our company, it was just my husband and I doing all the work. So we would go out all day long. So we develop websites for companies, and then we run wedding planners. So like in Canada, we run herweddingplanner.com, and then we have community websites as well. And during the day, we'd be out meeting clients all day long. And this is before pre-iPhone and pre-phones where you can check email. Then we come back at night and work all the emails, and then I'll do all the paperwork and all the work ourselves, basically. And then Julia was born, and it was just getting to be much. So then we started kind of bringing on more and more people to our team to help delegate the workload. And so we're at a point now where we run a whole team that we offset a lot of the work too. And so as long as we can manage everything at a distance, that's basically how we do it and how we run our business. And so when it comes to calling the clients, that's where there is a challenge when I have a poor internet connection. But really in most of Southeast Asia, we had a good enough connection that I could do phone calls and still have no problem. So we get SIM cards every country we go to. We just quickly pop it in and off we go. And now, of course, with the SIM cards having no roaming, a lot of countries you can be connected at a good enough speed. So, but in Malawi and different areas in Tanzania, it was like impossible. There was no connections. And so I would just have to ask Elena, who works with us, like, hey, can you call this person and get in touch with them, or tell them I'm not available till such and such a date. So we just made it work. But yeah, there could be those challenges, but we work around it, and so far so good. So
where is your team based?
All around the world, actually. Our team, literally around the world, many different countries. So there's a team of us. We have people who do programming and design and blogging and admin and, all the different things that you need to run a business. So, yeah.
So cool. So cool. And inspiring for your girls as well, right? Because they're not growing up with the traditional options presented to them. This year, our oldest, Carolina, was the right age to participate in go to work with the opposite parent. So,
oh yes.
So the girls went to work with the dads, and if they have one around, and the boys went to school with the mom. They work with the moms if they have one around, and it struck me as such a, on the one hand, cool, because it just broadens the scope of what their awareness is of different professions. But on the other hand, it really set me back on my heels, because I was thinking, hang on, does the very existence of this program implies that there are male jobs and female jobs?
Isn't it funny? Yeah.
I had a really strong reaction, and what I ended up, my youngest was like, oh, when I'm that age, I want to go to a barn, and I want to be in a horse barn, and I want to do, and I was like, well, if you're going with daddy, he works in a company, and that's not going to happen. I'm like, oh, what if I go with the owner? And I was like, well, she's a woman. So that's kind of, but that's what she wants to do. She wants to spend a day at a horse farm. Like that's her passion. And that's one of them. And that's what she wants to do. And so I was able to get Carolina to go with a friend because my husband was away. And so she went with a friend's dad who works in an architecture practice. And so she was able to work with their software and design her dream home. And like, but I really had this kind of strong sense of, hang on a second, what are we teaching the kids here? Like it's laudable to open horizons. It's great. And wow, what's under that? Like, are we still that, women become teachers and nurses and daddies become doctors and lawyers and like what, it was just culturally. And I am blessed to live in Switzerland and I adore living here and I fight with everything in me to stay all the time. If it ever comes up, like maybe we should go live somewhere else because cost of living, because my husband works in the country, because, and I'm like the anchored into here, scratching tooth and nail to stay because of all of the great things. And at the same time, recognizing that, wow, so your girls are really getting this broad spectrum of life experience and seeing how other people live and what other people do and how they do things, right?
Absolutely. But it's true what you just said earlier, because I remember the first time they received the paperwork to do this, where the girls go and experience a professional job in, and I don't even know if it was presented as the male sector or the female sector or how it was, but it was girls' reaction.
Girls go with their dads is how it is.
That how it's presented? I was just like, whoa, this is so, and I'm used to it though, because I'm like, it's Switzerland, what's politically incorrect in many other countries, people say it here. And it's just like, it's just, we're brought up in Canada where it's very equal, right? And then when you come to different countries, you realize, whoa, and I mean, it's like that. I mean, we've only been to a couple different countries where you don't really see the woman or they're covered up or, a few different countries like that. But like Brunei, for example, I had to go in and I had to put on a thing over my head and it's just awkward. Those situations, you're kind of like, you just feel like in a different position, if you will. And
because you are
so used to, you are, and you're just like, whoa, this is nuts, and that's interesting to see too. And it's nice to see that things are starting to change and getting better for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot afoot, and I feel like I need to compensate for having said something that's a bit critical, but because I love it here so much. But yeah, it's a reality. There's what I think is such a richness for your girls is that what we thought of as normal, like what you've just said. We grew up in Canada, I mean, a couple of kilometers from each other, really, and so we've come from the same kind of background. I was brought up in a very European family because my mom was French and we were very European focused. And we always had, my family had international friends. We had Indian friends and Pakistani friends and German friends and Swiss friends and Italian friends. And there were always all these languages in our house, which was amazing. But still this real, the basics of, well, people are people and men and women are equal. And hang on a second. And equal pay doesn't exist in Canada, even despite that. There's still a divide. Is there really? Yeah. There's still divides. Oh, for sure. But it's less of one. And so what for me was such an inalienable right as a young girl in Canada, and I really held on to that, was challenged many times when I came to see friends living in France that I remember flying to France after having been in school there for a year, and I went to spend a month one summer with my best friend and her family, and they were lovely, and both parents worked. They owned a business together. They were peers. They were phenomenal. But dinner was made by the mom. Mm-hmm. The table was set by the mom. The table was cleared by the daughters and the mom. And I remember one day looking at the dad as he sort of reclined on his chair by the beach smoking a cigar, and I was like, "Why aren't you doing this? You had dinner. Why don't you do something? How come it's always her doing stuff?" And I was 15, and obviously feeling my, power of, I know everything because, I'm 15. But it was really and I remember him being really shocked, that I had the gall to say it, to say this to my host who was taking me for the dreamiest summer ever for a month. but also that it was like challenging of like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. Like, this isn't fair. And that's a really beautiful thing that your girls are getting to experience and learn that, well, yeah, things are different. And maybe not to take, do they maybe take things less for granted? It's a story I make up in my head that your kids take things less for granted.
I bet, because just one of the reactions the other day, we were speaking with another family, and they were saying, oh, my daughter's really struggling and she's a little bit upset and such. And the attitude's a little bit there. And my youngest said, oh, mommy, I know that what will fix her. And I was like, oh, yeah. And she goes, yeah, she should go stay in Malawi for a couple of weeks. And then, and I was like, that's hilarious. Because she said, then she's going to be really happy with everything. You know, she'll just be so happy, you know, that she has water. And then my other daughter, just literally yesterday, she says, mommy, I am so happy because I turned on the water and it's hot and it's working. And she goes, I don't ever want to live in a place where you have to like heat up the water. And she goes, because then when the cold water is running, it's just wasting all the cold water while you're waiting for the hot water. That was her reaction. But you know what I'm saying? They when you said take for granted, they're realizing something small as having a hot water. And like it's like a luxury, you know, for a lot of people it is. And we turn on our water. We don't think of waste. We don't think like, oh, I should turn it off, or all those little things that when you go to other countries that don't have all those things, you realize. So they do see the difference. Absolutely. 100%. And they don't have that kind of snotty kind of attitude as a teenager might have, because they realize like they don't really have the right to complain, you know. And I think that's a huge advantage that they were taught basically by traveling. So
yeah. Do you think that you guys will continue to travel like this?
Absolutely. 100%. Our goal is to see, you know, it's a crazy goal, but it's to see every country in the world. And so we have many more to go through, and some of them are going to be like hard ones, with being, you know, just 3 young girls and, you know, as a family structure, but that's a goal that we have to do. So we're going through them little by little. And yeah.
How do you pick the places that you go to?
Well, my husband's very strategic in his planning. And so he has like all the different African trips planned out, more or less, kind of where we're going to go and how we're going to do it. And so, I mean, he's been working on this probably ever since we were married in his mind. And so he's got it all more or less planned out. So, yeah.
And I imagine that given you are a family structure and you're obviously different from the local population, like it's not like you blend in. If you go to Florida, you blend in. If you go to Australia, you blend in, but not if you're going to go to Chad or
right.
You know, most African countries, you're not going to blend in either visually or culturally or height-wise or build or anything.
Right.
I guess you take into account political situations and health situations and all that kind of stuff.
And it's interesting that you said that, because I always thought, like, what is it going to be like? You know, what is it going to feel like? And to be honest, just feels like normal, you know, like, yeah, I mean, we put ourselves in situations like, I was speaking with one of the locals and she was like, whoa, you guys went there? You know, I was like, yeah. And she goes, you're so naive.
Yeah, which is probably one of your strengths, right?
It's probably a blessing to be naive. And, you know, we were the only white people in that city where area. But people are people. But I mean, like, you know, there's different issues in different countries. You know, in some countries, it's not a big deal. But in certain areas in South Africa, it might be a problem, right? Yeah. But, you know, we didn't feel ever insecure, and people are nice everywhere you go. So there might be a handful that ruin it for everybody else. But yeah, so we do take into consideration, you know, certain safety things and political things that might be happening. We were going to cross over once into the border, and there was like a political, I wouldn't say a riot, but the roads were all blocked off and things like that were happening. So we just had to wait and just wait for things to calm down before we can, you know, go through. Mm-hmm. So all those things to take into effect. And that's, again, why we don't have like a severe, strict plan. Sure. We have to be there at this date. We just like, okay, let's just go day by day by day, right? So, yeah.
So how are you met usually when you arrive in places, like whether they be places where there are lots of tourists, or maybe not lots, but regularly frequent tourists, or places where they never see anybody? who is from away? How are you met generally with by local people?
Most people are just, just happy to talk, and it's easy, speaking English. Most of these countries, they do speak a bit of English, and then when they don't, you get by, with your sign language or whatever you have to work with. No, and we travel super light. So when we show up, we have our little bags and here we are. And I think when you have a family, people are very welcoming. When you have kids, it's kind of like having a little puppy dog, right? Our kids are now getting older, but you're very well received and very well welcome. We just need to borrow a baby. We'll be really well received. Again, everywhere we go, right? Everyone loves kids. So it's kind of one of those, like, culturally around the world, you're very well received and welcome. I'm sure it would be the same traveling on your own or as a couple, but it just seems like, I don't know if that's what you get as added protection too. I just feel like it'd be really like to go after a single traveler to scam someone, let's say, it's easier to do than a family structure, right? So it's kind of, we've got this like protection around us, and I do believe we have protection around us as well. I pray for that. So you have to. So
yeah, I totally believe it as well. Do you ever, if you're going to certain parts of the world, you said you travel light, which I admire, because this is not one of the gifts I was blessed with. I'm the eventuality packer.
So this is one of the things that, like, I always say, like, it's crazy too, because sometimes we'll set off for like a 1 month trip, and then 3 months later we're still not back, and that's just happened recently. And so we leave, and I'll say to the girls, pretend we're packing for a weekend. That's all we need. It's just like our weekend clothes and our weekend things, so that we can kind of limit what we have. And the challenge is like, okay, it's okay for maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks like that. But then once you get to like month 2, you're like, oh my gosh, I cannot live like this anymore. I want my stuff, stuff, meaning like I like candles and essential oils and my creams and options for makeup, or, all those little things that we take for granted.
Underwear.
Yeah. Like clothes, like all those things, and like you're like wearing the same thing over and over and over again, and like after a while it's taxing as a woman. It's really challenging, and then we don't have room to like bring more. But the blessing of it is, if you do have a lot of stuff, you have to lug that in and out everywhere you check in and out, and that's like
tiring.
Added, it is. So it's easier to travel light for sure, but after a while, it's just nice to be back with all of our little luxuries, tools like your kitchen tools and stuff like that when you're doing your own cooking, like just something so simple as a peeler to peel vegetables. Like when you don't have a good one and you're making your own meals, like depending on where you're traveling, that can be like, oh man, I need that, or a garlic press, or So those are the things that, like, it's like the pros and the cons, right?
Sure. There's positive and negative to everything. So what are the non-negotiable things that you will not leave home without, other than obviously your kids, your husband, and your passports?
Oh, the non-negotiable things. Well, the laptops, of course. That's like a must. No, just like I said, like we try to keep it to like, okay, what would we need for the weekend? What can we survive on a weekend? And then, a couple added things, and that's it. So.
Amazing. I admire that, as well as all of the courage and the bravery that you guys have in just going out and living your life. 2 more questions. One is, how did the people around you, your family, your friends, your community react when you decided very early on to start coloring outside the lines, and then you colored like on a whole different page? How did that?
Most people were, I think, pretty open to it and okay with it. I think, we didn't really get any, oh, don't go, other than like, for example, when we were in Colombia, we were in Ecuador, and Chloe was sick, and then we were going to go to Colombia, and there was just things like, my dad at the time, he's like, do not go there, it is dangerous, so you get like kind of some resistance then like that. But, other than that, like, people and it's usually the locals. Like, for example, my friends from Brazil, they were like, oh, okay, Chantal, it's like this, like, be safe, be careful. Same with South Africa. The South Africans are like, it's like this, it's like this, it's like this, So, but other than that, most people are like, this is great. Have fun, enjoy. Yeah.
And it sounds like also you have your focus firmly planted in what to me feels like the right place, which is inside. Like, how does this feel? Is this what we want to do? Is this aligned with how we want to live? Okay, then we're doing it. And it kind of doesn't matter what other people think. I realized as I was asking you the question, I was like, why am I even asking her that question?
Yeah. I mean, you go with like that gut intuition feeling too, in everything. I think when you're traveling, for example, we were leaving that day in South Africa, and we had stopped, and we just received an email saying the flight was going to be delayed by like 5 hours. And we're like, oh gosh, we have all this time now. And we were looking at these guys jumping off and paragliding down the mountain. And it was like, oh, this is really nice. We were just enjoying it. And my youngest, Chloe, she says, Mommy, I really want to do that one day. And the guy in front of us, we were talking to him, and he's like, do you want to go now? I'll take you, right? And I was like, Chloe, you want to do it? And she was like, no. And I'm like, yeah, you have the opportunity. Just go, like, just have fun, right? And I remember thinking as she's getting set up, I'm like, does this feel right? Is it okay? Like, cross-checking my gut, because like it's our last day. If anything were to happen, I'm just sending her off with some stranger and jumping off a mountain, like, it just like all these things would start going through my head. Like, and I'm like, it feels right. It's okay. It's fine. You kind of cross-check your feeling, like, is it a yeah or is it a no, and if there was anything like, this isn't good, then I would just like, no, you're not going, but it was fine. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you have a really strong connection with your inner wisdom and your inner knowing, and that you trust that, and that you also trust that things are going to work out, and that, jump in the net, the net will appear, is the way that you guys function.
And I don't know that and I think that was learned as we go. I think that was taught to me. Like, I think it was a gift that I received when we were going through everything, that it'll just work out. And it seems to be that we are always taking care of every little step of the way, which is crazy, because not everybody would live their life like that, or even be daring enough to do it. But when you do, and you realize that provision comes, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And you don't always know how, like in my brain, because you're always trying to figure out how's this going to work? And you're like, as soon as you kind of like, it just works out, which is crazy. Like I could tell you story after story after story where you think like, this is just crazy. It's nuts. And they've just always like worked out for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think it's taking that step forward. And then when you take the step, then things start to align.
Start moving and trusting, and not needing to know the how. One of my mentors often says, like, once you have your dream, know your dream and start to feel that it's already happening. Like, actually feel in your body what it feels like when that dream is happening. It's done. It's a done deal. Feel how it happens, how you feel. And the more you feel into that, the closer you get to actually doing it, because you start to behave differently. And that's what this book by Wayne Dyer is really talking about, which is Fulfilled. And he's talking about how you trust, you have a really, really clear vision and this unshakable mission of what you want to do, or what you want, like what you actually want. So not just like, oh yeah, I'd like to go on holiday to Bali, or oh yeah, it'd be fun to see Australia, or no, like something that is really burning inside of you. And that once that is there and that focus is there and you really commit to it, that you then trust and try not to think about the how, is what this friend of mine, actually, it's Natasha Vanzetti. She's episode, I'm going to tax my brain here. I think she's episode 7. I don't have a list in front of me.
Okay.
But Natasha Vanzetti and I talked about mind shit, she calls it. And all of the stories that we tell ourselves that stop us from living our lives really how we want to live. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. It's don't worry about the how. Know what you want to do and how you want to.
And as a woman, like, I am more about the worry. Like, I could stay up at night thinking like, how's this going to work? How's this going to work? But then when you realize that it just works out, you're like, this is crazy, and you didn't expect that. It's not like what your mind was expecting. It came in a different way, or you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's just been like awesome to
proven to you over and over and over again.
Yeah, we've put in situations where we had to have it proven to us. So it's kind of nice, right? It's like everyone who waits to have a baby, it's the same thing, right? Because you'll never be ready.
No.
Like people
to start a business or have a baby or take that trip
You're nothing's ever going to be perfect. Nothing is ever going to be or certain, never. And so you just have to do it. And I think coming from America's side, we have more of a way that was kind of ingrained into us that it's okay to fail. If something doesn't happen right, it's okay to fail. Whereas in Europe, there's more of there's no option for failure, especially like in Switzerland, for example. And I find that that's why people don't start businesses, because it's harder, because there's the risk factor. There's all these things that might not work out. Whereas in America, people embrace that aspect of you tried it. And if it didn't work, you tried.
You learned something.
Yeah. And so there's a difference there, right, of that. And so I think that was a blessing that was kind of ingrained in us by coming from, America's side of the world.
Okay. So last question, which is, where do you get your MamaFuel when you're home and when you're on the road?
My MamaFuel. Okay.
MamaFuel.
For me, if I can do exercise and let's say dance and Zumba and different things like that, that fuels me. That gives me enough energy to get through what I need to go through. And then different, I read different verses, whether it's biblical or inspirational quotes, and I put those up everywhere. And that it fuels me, it grounds me, keeps me positive, keeps my mind in the right kind of direction and stuff like that. So that's, I think, what does it the most. When we travel, I must say it's a little bit challenging. I don't have my me time. I don't have my exercise time like I would, all those little things. And so that is, that's when I learn how to do that, when I learn how to have that balance when we're traveling, I'll share it, because I don't have that yet, to be honest.
Yeah.
There's the honest truth.
It's learning how to carve out the time in an environment. Like if you're in, I don't know, whatever country you're in Africa or in Asia, or anywhere really, you're not necessarily going to go for that run. If you don't, like here in Switzerland, you just go for a run. You just know that you're fine and you go for a run.
Yeah.
Whereas as a woman on your own, going for a run in lots of those places ain't going to happen. You can spot in the room that you're staying in, but
it's just different.
Not much of a workout, really.
No.
Yeah. So it does. I can imagine that would be a challenge. So if people want to follow you on your brand new YouTube, well, not so brand new, on your very rapidly growing and really fun YouTube channel, where can they find you?
It's at Growing Up Without Borders, and they can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website, growingupwithoutborders.com. There we're going to be sharing the upcoming trips and some of the kind of back scenes of who we are and such. But yes, absolutely. All the handles are Growing Up Without Borders.
Awesome. Growing Up Without Borders. Well, I will include the links in the show notes so that at time of publishing, everyone who is listening to this at time of publishing and beyond can see where you are in the world. Because right now you've just come back from Spain and you guys are in Africa. And what's next? What's your next?
Next, we are going to be stateside and Central America. And then after that, it's going to be like the Pacific Islands. So big plans. Yay!
So exciting. So exciting. And what a great thing to look forward to know that you're home. And do you guys have an apartment in Switzerland or a house?
Absolutely. And when we come back home, you get like the instant community. Like I already had friends text me, we're all going to the lake for lunch, meet us there. It's just like, you get that, and then when we travel, we try to keep that community as well, whether it's through groups that we do meetups and stuff, but a little bit more challenging than when you're home. Right. So
for sure.
I'm really excited.
Well, keep traveling and keep inspiring us and keep expanding your horizons and ours with you. It's a real pleasure to connect with you now after primary school, almost 30 years later, and to have this opportunity to talk to you. I've really, really appreciated it. And I wish
you
great onward travels.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anne.
Well, it's been such a pleasure. Talk soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Bye for now.
That's it for today's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join us, go to www.thecenteredmamaproject.com/Facebook and make sure you say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate and leave a review. Every comment helps, and it is always a delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.